today I'm talking to Elle Farris. Elle is corporate counsel for our Newmont Australia region, working from our Perth regional office. And my name is Beatrice Opoku-Asare, Director for Talent Management, Inclusion, and Diversity at Newmont. So, every day, sometimes we're thinking about what we want to do, and it's in our minds, and we may never take action on it. But Elle is somebody who has thought about something and decided, I'm just going to speak up about it. It's not going to just stay in my mind. I'm going to share it and start a more difficult conversation. So that's why I wanted to speak to Elle today. So, Elle, can you tell us a little bit about your current role and, what you do at Newmont?
Yeah. So I'm the corporate counsel. So pretty much that means I'm a lawyer in the legal team for Australia. So I advise all aspects of the business, so from procurement, so if we want to buy goods or have services on site, to HR, so any sort of issues with employment. I also do a lot of work in the ethics and compliance space, and basically any issue that Newmont Australia faces kind of comes across my desk to give advice on. So that's pretty much what I do.
That is really cool. That sounds like a very, very interesting role. So tell us about, how your career began, what has been your career trajectory and how has it looked like?
Yeah. So I always wanted to be a lawyer. I don't know why, but I always wanted to be a lawyer from a young age. So I went to university, did my law degree. I also did a Bachelor of Arts in European Studies. And then I went to a private top tier law firm called Allen's. And basically I worked there for a few years in their mining team, in their projects team. So I did a lot of work there. And then an opportunity arose to work at Newmont. And I'd heard really good things about Newmont, and I really wanted to be able to transition, I guess, from being a private lawyer, working with a lot of other lawyers, to working for a big company and working in the mining area. So that's kind of how I made that transition. I just thought it was too good an opportunity to not try. So here I am 2 years later, still in the same role.
Wow. It's always interesting to kind of transition careers from, one setting into another. So it's really nice to hear you say that you have done that. What lesson did you pick up from that, just transitioning into this kind of role?
Yeah, definitely a lot of lessons. I think being a lawyer in a law firm is very different to being a lawyer in a company. In a company, you have a lot of different personalities, you have a lot of different stakeholders. So I think you have to be really good at communicating and a lot more confident in yourself, because you really are, I'm a team of four. So you're giving advice, you really need to be confident, where in a law firm, I guess you're kind of surrounded by lawyers. So you have a lot more people to lean on in that aspect. So I think that's definitely a lesson learned, and having to deal with different stakeholders that have different interests in the business. Like, you've got to think about the costs of what you're doing, profits, and all of those things come into play in terms of how you're going to do your job, where that's, very different in a law firm model, because you're kind of you're making profit all the time. Where here, you're a cost. So you really need to make sure that what you're bringing is actually helping the business do what it needs to do.
Wow. That is really interesting. I mean, when I transitioned from health and safety into talent management, I think I can relate to what you're talking about in terms of you really needing to understand the stakeholders that you're working with. When you're working in health and safety as a mining company, health and safety is like, what we breathe, right? Everybody thinks about safety. And then, you come into the people space and you realize that you need to prompt people a little bit more, you need to stakeholder more. And so that I can totally relate to some of that experience. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about today is also around challenges. I know that when I started in the mining industry, even though nobody put it in words, I felt I needed to work twice as hard. And I also felt that I needed to be 10 times as careful in terms of how I showed up, especially with that burden of either being the first or being the only, or, whatever minority group that you find yourself in. Tell me a bit about some of the challenges that you have faced or even continue to face in the mining industry and how either you've overcome them or continue to address them.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I think it's sometimes some of the challenges can be those small things that really do add up over time. So I've definitely walked into rooms where I've been the only female. And straight away, you kind of get this feeling of like people are looking at you as if to be like, are you in the wrong room? Or, you're the young female in the room. So you kind of feel like you're not meant to be there. And I've definitely, had experiences where I've been in the room at Newmont with, my two senior male counterparts, and we're with a contractor and they won't address me by my title, but will address my male counterparts. And instead, I've been referred to as the assistant, or I think they think I'm there to serve coffee. So it's those little things that like really kind of chip away at you over time, and they make you feel really degraded because you're going in and you're like, oh, I'm meant to be here. Like, and you start to kind of feel like you have to be defensive almost because you're trying to feel like you're having to justify. So I think the way I try to overcome that is trying my hardest not to let it get to me and trying to be more confident and being like, no, I'm meant to be here. I'm not the assistant. I'm the corporate counsel and, I have a fundamental role here. And I guess just trying to not let it get to you, which is, a lot easier said than done. But I think it's helpful when you have like, for example, my senior male counterparts in that instance let me lead the meeting, kept referring to me with my title, and that really helped me. So I think that's like kind of how I've overcome those challenges that I've had.
That is such a good point because, I know that I do a lot of self talk, right? I'm like, you can do this, you were meant for this, you've studied for this, you have the experience for this. And I'm
Yeah.
usually, trying to hype myself into whatever state of being that I need to be in. What are some of your tips and tricks? Like, how do you become your biggest cheerleader, or when you're sitting in that meeting and somebody's referring to just your male colleague, or when you're in that moment of that challenge, what are some of the simple tricks, and tips that you have around that?
Yeah. I definitely talk to myself as well in my head, and kind of, have a mental conversation with three personalities in my mind almost. I think the little tips and tricks is definitely talking to yourself and trying to calm yourself down so that you can, just not letting it affect you. So in those situations, I would straight away start to feel quite nervous and start to, kind of fold into myself. So I'll consciously tell myself like, no, sit up, speak calmly, even take a breath and just kind of like get back into it and feel more confident. Because I think if you're confident in response to someone who's trying to kind of put you down, it's the best response because you're not being defensive. You're just kind of standing your ground and, really showing that you're there, and that you're meant to be there. So those are like kind of the little things that I do. So I definitely talk to myself as well and then just try to calm myself down without becoming, defensive or like super nervous and anxious.
Those are really good tips and tricks. Thanks for sharing that. So you did mention allies, and I'll come to allies in a bit because I strongly believe that allies have a critical role in creating change and especially culture change. So I'll come back to that in a bit. But let's talk a bit about the article that you wrote. You wrote an article that was published on Newmont's website as a blog post. And the title of the article, if anybody listening wants to know, was Skimping on Standards, Diggers and Dealers 2020. And this was last year. For me personally, when I read the article, I was so in awe. I was like, who is this person, Elle Farris, who just like is so bold and, just decided to just go for it? Because for me, I'm a natural introvert, so I have to think things through and really convince myself and have like three different plans, A, B, C, before I take such a bold step. And I was so in awe of you for challenging this, being willing, first of all, to challenge the status quo, and second of all, being willing to be that bold about it and to take it out there and say, what, I want to speak about this topic. So, tell us, I know that, at Newmont, one of the things we try to do is to eliminate symbols of exclusion, right? Basic things that tell people you don't belong here. Either something we're doing or something we're not doing. An example would be when you go underground, as a woman, is there a washroom for me to use? Or when I come to your mine site, and I'm being given, personal protective equipment, do I get one that fits my body size and, it's perfect for me? Or am I given, maybe a men's size L, and that's like the norm. Those are basic things that just tell people that we're not ready for you or you don't belong here.
Yeah.
So we've been trying to eliminate a lot of those. So tell me a bit, for those who don't know what skimping is, and for those who don't know about diggers and dealers, maybe tell us a bit about that, and then share with us what made you write that article and why it was so important to you.
Okay. Thank you, by the way, for the positive comments. It's always really lovely and beautiful to hear that when people feel that it was, that it affected them and, positively impacted them. So thank you for that. So skimpies, for people that don't know, it's kind of like a colloquial term for, I guess, bartenders that are female that wear little to no clothing. So it used to be back in the day they would wear no clothing, and now it's usually lingerie. So they're in, I guess, sort of skimpy clothing. That's where the term sort of comes from colloquially. And Diggers and Dealers is, one of the biggest events, the networking events in mining, and, an incredible conference in terms of what it actually offers in terms of the industry intellect that's there. But it's always been tarnished by this reputation of skimpies, even from its creation, because they're very much associated with the event. So I guess that's the context. And why this article came about is because I always knew about Diggers and Dealers and kind of always knew it had this bad reputation. I'd heard about it when I was at my law firm, and my boyfriend recently attended Diggers and Dealers last year, and, he came home and we were having a conversation, and he was, I was kind of questioning him as to why he would attend events where there was skimpies, because I just, I didn't agree with it. It made me feel really uncomfortable. And I just thought it wasn't appropriate. So I was kind of challenging him of why would you go? Why would you support this? And his response to me was really quite interesting, and it struck a chord with me. He was explaining to me that he didn't support it, but he really had no other choice. His words to me were, well, where else am I going to go? How am I going to interact with my clients? And it just really frustrated me, because I was like, how is that, not only are you making women feel uncomfortable, but you're also making men feel like they don't have another choice. And here I am as a woman having my boyfriend support something that, excludes women, but he's not actively doing it, but he has no other choice. So it kind of just makes you feel, it really fired me up. And I think, I'm old enough now that I feel confident in speaking up about these issues, and I really wanted to talk about it and raise it. And, I definitely had fears at the start that, it could have negative implications. But, all I've seen that has had massive, positive support, encouragement from everyone in the industry and Newmont and leadership. So that's why I wrote it. And I wrote it as well because I thought it was really important to talk about exclusion. And I think in the 21st century, no matter what race you are, what sexual preference you are, how you identify gender, if you're a woman or a man or transgender, you shouldn't be excluded, you shouldn't be degraded. And I just think that type of behavior should be called out, quite frankly. And I think, the mining industry pushes so much for female engagement. We always see female stats, we always see diversity stats, all these statements about equality. And yet we have one of the, most renowned events for the mining industry for people to go to has this association which excludes women and makes them feel uncomfortable and sexualizes them. So it needs to be called out, because I really think the mining industry needs to walk the walk. And, if they're going to say that they're going to do things that support equality, well, then they need to start showing that. And I think, that was really important to call out, basically.
Well, I think that's so great. The fact that you called the behavior out, but when you added skimping on the standards, right? Everybody knows that we use a lot of standards in the mining industry and standard operating procedures, and people could relate to that. What are some of the things that you have heard, either within the company or outside the company, in terms of the impact that the article has made? Has it sparked dialogue? Are people really taking action? Or what are some of the things that you have heard since the article came out?
It's been amazing. There's actually been so much support, not only from, all of Newmont's senior leadership, from, Alex Bates, our CEO, Tom Palmer, Rob Atkinson, Nancy Lipson, my boss, then also, everyone at site. I've had Yammer posts of people really, saying how they felt that they could speak up now because someone else has spoken up. And it was really heartfelt, and it was really amazing to, be told that you've inspired someone. And, I've even had people message me outside of the business, talking about experiences they've had and how they've struggled, or, that they don't want their daughters or, sisters to go through this kind of behavior. So it was really positive. And I know that Newmont's taking even further steps to really try and encourage other members of the industry to stop kind of supporting diggers and dealers. We no longer talk at the conference purely because of that association and how it's, it's not in line with our values of inclusion and integrity to attend such events. So we're really pushing other members of the industry to stop attending, or to come up with something that's inclusive for all, right? Like, we should have an event where everyone feels welcome, and definitely not excluding, a whole category of people. So definitely had lots of positive responses, and also had some, negative responses as well. But I think that's part of the conversation. We need to understand what the other side of the coin is and try and work with people to come up with a solution. Because there's nothing wrong with what skimpies do. That's their job. There's absolutely no judgment there. It's just that it's not appropriate in the workplace sort of networking context.
That's a good point. If you had the chairperson or the committee that plans diggers and dealers listening to this, interview, what would you say to them? Where would you want them to start?
It's a great question. I think I'd want them to start. By making the change. I know Diggers itself has over the years tried to disassociate itself with skimpies. So I think there is a need there and a want from them, because surely they don't want this kind of negative conversation that always comes up. So I think for them, the change starts with offering alternatives. Why can't we have networking events that have, that just don't have skimpies, quite frankly? They're not needed in that kind of context. So I don't know why we can't just offer, networking events alongside this great conference so that everyone can go. Because, I'm really glad that I didn't even have to ask to go because Newmont doesn't support it. Because if I did, I would feel really uncomfortable, because on one hand, I wouldn't want to miss out on opportunities. But on the other hand, I, wouldn't want to sit with my boss and have someone serve me, barely clothed. It would just feel really weird. So I think the change for them is to start listening to people. I mean, this conversation has been going on for a while now, and I think there's a lot of people that want to see the change. And I think they need to, if they're going to preach equality and preach inclusion, then they need to start getting rid of these traditions, that, they were in place 30 years ago when I was born. I mean, it's time for change. So I think that's where they need to start.
Call to action. I like that. So let's talk a bit about, you've mentioned allies a number of times as we started talking. For Newmont, one of our pillars is really engaging allies in the conversation. That is not always easy, right? Because their experiences are different from the experiences of the minority group that they're trying to support. How have allies showed up in your career and really stepped up to either empower you, to sponsor you, or maybe just to partner you, or just stepped up for you? You talked about some of the meetings where people just ignore that a contractor may ignore that you're even in that meeting, or that this is the position that you're in. How have you, experienced allies just stepping up throughout your career?
Yeah. I think firstly, allies make it all possible. There is no way I would have been able to speak up without the support of allies. I think it's part and parcel of the same, because they kind of champion you and take away that fear and give you encouragement. So I've definitely, I think the biggest ally I've had of late is definitely my boss, Andrew Kennedy. When I told him, I basically said to him, look, I'm writing this article, whether you like it or not. And then his response was, well, we'll publish it. We love that. And, I was like, oh my gosh, okay. So, straight away he was like, send me a draft, let's publish it. He got our Australian CEO on the line, Alex Bates, who then sent it up to Tom and Rob. And, they all showed support, and that was massive for me. I mean, I've got, CEOs of Newmont reading this article I wrote about something that I feel passionate about. And, it doesn't affect them necessarily because they're men, but they were really supportive and they understood why it was important to me. And why they should support it. So I think that speaks volumes to, how those allies have really stepped up. And, even just small examples of, my male counterparts in that meeting, making sure that they addressed me with my seat, with my title, and, really kind of showing that the contractor was wrong. And I think in those instances, it makes all the difference because really it's a group effort, and we need everyone to be involved. So that's, I guess, like the main allies. And I've definitely had strong female leaders, I think, when I was at my law firm, that really showed me that, being a woman or being a mom doesn't make you any less in terms of your career, and you should not get a promotion because you're on maternity leave. And I think they really instilled some confidence in me in terms of being a woman, and that it is hard. And we still got a long way to go.
Absolutely, we do. I think some allies struggle with, knowing what to do. They may want to show up and they want to be involved, but they don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to, they don't want to offend anybody. And they're just not sure. They're willing, but they're just not sure, what to do or the steps that they should take. And you've mentioned, our CEO, Tom Palmer, our COO, you've mentioned your boss, Andrew Kennedy, your RSVP, Alex Bates, and so many other allies. What is your advice for allies who are like, I just don't know what to do? What should I do? What is your advice for them?
I think my advice for them would be ask the question. I think a lot of the time, if you ask the person who's seeking the support, they'll tell you what would what would help them, whether or not it's support on the sidelines, whether or not it's publishing an article on behalf of them, things like that. I think if you're unsure, just ask, because a lot of the time someone will want to tell you how they want support. Like I definitely, luckily I didn't even have to ask my boss. He just did what, was super supportive for me. But I think it's just asking the question and almost internalizing it yourself as well, and thinking about if that was you in that situation and you were dealing with that issue, what would you want? How would you want support? Is it a phone call? Is it an email? Is it a public statement? I think that's kind of what my advice would be for allies.
So I know that you're involved with the business resource group. And, I see a lot of posts from you on Yammer. And, is there anything you want to share about, the business resource groups that we have at Newmont and, how people can be involved or the impact that you think the BRGs are making? Is there anything that you'd like to share on that?
Definitely. I think the fact that Newmont has BRGs speaks volumes. So we have, for example, in Perth, we have the Perth Pride BRG, which is really about speaking about, LGBTQI people and, what challenges they face and how we can make sure we have a more inclusive workplace for people who have different gender identities or sexual preferences. And I think that's really important that the business has a dedicated group that's actually, doing events, recognizing days of significance, because I think that's how we are making sure there's not just a policy. It doesn't just sit on the desk and doesn't get actioned. Like we actually have groups and we actually do things throughout the year. So I think that's something that really speaks volume. And I know there's unity at the Australia office. I know in Denver you have, the BRGs as well. And I think, it's just around supporting women. It's also around supporting other people that might be marginalized. So, the LGBTQI community. It's really important that we protect those people and make sure that they're included, because I think ultimately no one should be excluded at all. And it's awful to think that people are excluded when they come to work. It's hard enough as it is. So I think having those BRGs is fundamental. And, people can join the BRGs. We have a Yammer page on the Australia office. We always encourage people to sign up if they want to come to events. We send out, Australia all emails for people who, might want to come to a morning tea where we talk about, an LGBTI day of significance, like Ida Hobbit Day. So that's kind of what we do in that space. And I think it's really, really important to show that support for people that might not necessarily have it.
Absolutely. I think, BRGs, like you said, help create a sense of belonging. Yeah. Even when you're the only, you don't feel alone because, there's probably somebody else in another function or there's an ally present and you really don't waste your time trying to fit in. You know, you can just be yourself and be the best version of yourself. You feel respected, you feel valued. And when people feel that way, they bring their A game to the team, right? They're not spending all their time trying to, be something that they're not. So I like what you said about like creating that sense of belonging at Newmont.
Absolutely.
So this is going to be my last question.
Yeah.
I'm really, I've really enjoyed our conversation. I cannot believe I have a last question. I was like, how can I find more questions for Elle? So this does not end. But if you were seeing a younger Elle, who was just starting her career, what advice would you give her? Or to any women who are at the start of their career, especially in the mining industry?
I think the advice I would give would definitely be speak up. I think I definitely struggled when I was younger doing that. And it wasn't until I had allies that I felt comfortable enough to speak up and kind of, talk about issues that affect me. And I remember when I was nervous about, speaking up about this issue, my friend said to me, if you're not going to stand up for yourself and for others, what are you doing here? And I think that's really important because it's really about like you need to speak up for things that affect you because ultimately, it's you that has to live it every day and you shouldn't have to be put through, awful experiences where you're degraded or feel less or you go home and you're upset. So I think it's definitely speak up. And that's easier said than done. I think, in order to speak up, you need allies. So finding allies, finding people that are going to support you and champion you, I think makes all the difference. And it's something that I probably didn't know was so important when I was younger because I was just so focused on doing the job. But it's when the job becomes quite hard, you realize that you really need those things. And I think the last one as well would be to stick at it. I think it's really hard sometimes to be dealing with all these issues and feeling marginalized and to not just, pull the pin. Because it's hard. And I think, for younger women or anyone facing issues of being marginalized, you need to try to stick at it because at the end of the day, you deserve to be there just as much as the next person, just as much as the man next to you, or just as much as someone else who has a different race or identity. I think that's really important that you stick at it because I think too many times, women leave the industry because they don't want to have to deal with issues. They don't want to have to go onto site and be sexualized or joked about or, be told to, cook and clean and things like that. So I think it's sticking at it, speaking up, and then hopefully that way, we will have a better industry for everyone. I think we've come a long way, but there's still so far to go, which is evident from the fact that we still have events like Diggers. So I think that's like the advice I would give myself looking back and any other women as well starting their career in mining.
That is great advice. I can totally relate to it because having the difficult conversations and really speaking up about the difficult issues, especially when you're the only, or especially when you're first, it's really difficult when you're starting your career. So those are really good tips that you've provided. I hope that it can go a long way to help somebody who is listening to this, who is wondering if I should speak up about this issue or if I should not speak up about this issue. So thank you so much for your time today. This has been a great conversation. I'm hoping that maybe we should do this more often and, bring others in and have different conversations as we go along on our journey. So thank you so much for your time today, and I hope we chat again soon.
Thank you so much. I've loved talking to you. Yeah, I'm sure we will chat again soon.